quality. And we got the recording in progress. Bear with me for just a minute. Our live students, I'm going to welcome those that are watching this as a recording. Welcome. Thank you for watching this recording. This is session number 21, entitled Rebuilding the Walls, and we're in the series called The Story. I'm Paul McLeod, the Minister of Education at Mount Calvary Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. Thank you so much for joining us. For everyone, this is our last Old Testament session. Wow, the time has really flown. I remember starting this series and thinking there's about 32, 33 sessions in this series. And I remember thinking and counting the number of weeks and thinking, wow, this is going to take a long time. Well, time flies. And it has definitely flown by. And we've taken a look at the Old Testament. A couple things that we're going to do this evening is the first thing is we're going to understand how these two stories of Ezra and Nehemiah rebuilding the walls, how they help us see God's upper story plans for Israel. God is steadily putting the pieces together. He's steadily building towards this big solution to the universal problem that Adam started way back in the Garden of Eden. And so we're building towards a solution. The second thing, as I was preparing this session this past week, I did notice that there wasn't a lot of emphasis. You'll hear some emphasis in the video by Randy Frazee mentioned and a little bit in your reading, but I wanted to blow up and I wanted to expand this, this period between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, there's many names for this gap between Malachi and Matthew. About 400 years, there was no recorded prophecy, and God revealing himself for about 400 years between the last book of Malachi, or the Old Testament, Malachi, first book of the New Testament in Matthew. You could call that between the testaments. Scholars like to call it the intertestamental period. And so there's a couple different names for that in between time. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about the historical background of the New Testament, which includes this gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The reason I'm doing that is to give you really a flavor for what's coming up in the New Testament, give you some good background, because we're going to be referencing some things that are going to be said in this session. I'm going to be referencing some of these things in the New Testament. And I want to make sure that you're acclimated to the things going on in the New Testament. Because when you compare the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are some major differences. There's different governments, there's different languages, definitely different people interacting. Of course, the same God, same Holy Spirit, and the same Jesus in the Old Testament and the New Testament, but there's a lot of things in the background going on during that period of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you Randy Frazee's video first, and that's going to be session 21, Rebuilding the Wall. The notes are on page 181 of your student guide, of your study guide. Page 181, you can fill in the blanks there at the bottom of the page. And it's about 10 minutes, maybe 11 minutes long. After this video, I'm going to play you a longer video talking about the historical background of the New Testament. Now, so what this means is that we're going to be watching more video and a little less discussion than we normally do. And I hope that doesn't really turn you off, but I really wanted to pack in some information before we go into the New Testament so that you can be acclimated and get a lot out of our reading in the New Testament. And Betty Walker's on with us too, probably listening with Teresi. So great. Thank you for that chat and that reminder. So the first video that we're going to see, about 10 or 11 minutes long, is Randy Frazee, notes on page 181. Bear with me as I share my screen. And you'll probably have to adjust your sound on your device. Here we go. Oops. All right, we'll start that again. Bear with me here. Didn't push enough buttons. Got to push the right number of buttons.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put on my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night I went through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on towards the fountain gate and the king's pool. There was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up to the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. And then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, "Let us start rebuilding." So they began this good work.
The Old Testament comes to an end with 3 building projects. There's the rebuilding of the temple under the leadership of Zerubbabel. God once again has a place to stay. Sacrifices are once again being made for sins. There's the rebuilding of the wall around the city of Jerusalem under Nehemiah's leadership. There is now protection from the many folks who have bullied them over the years. But the most important rebuilding project going on is the rebuilding of the lives of God's people. What happens next is not Zerubbabel's idea, not Nehemiah's idea, or even Ezra the priest idea. It was the people's idea. They are initiating their own restoration with God, and this is the way it should be. They all gathered together at the water gate, all the men, women, and children. They told Ezra to bring out the book of the law of Moses. It had been 140 years since they heard anyone read God's word to them. They were truly hungry. They had been through a lot. They had been rightfully disciplined by God and now ready to listen. The story tells us that they were sitting on the edge of their seat. Ezra is going to read the entire book of the law. You may remember that Joshua did this after the sin of Achan. This spiritual experience serves to refocus, to recenter, to remind Israel of what is important. It aids in the rebuilding program of a life aligned to God's upper story. This has been our goal as we have gone through this story together, that God would refocus, recenter, remind, and rebuild our lives on what is important, his upper story. Here is how it unfolded. Ezra opened the book. All the people could see him because he was standing above them, and as he opened it, the people all stood up. Ezra praised the Lord, the great God, and all the people lifted their hands and responded, "Amen, amen." Then they bowed down and worshiped the Lord with their faces to the ground. The Hebrew word for amen literally means "so be it." What a different attitude from the days of the kings. The story continues. The Levites instructed the people in the law while the people were standing there. They read from the book of the law of God, making it clear and giving the meaning so that the people understood what was being read. The Levites, those who served in the temple, formed small groups throughout the large crowd, making sure the people understood what was being read. You know, the Bible is sometimes hard to understand. We need others to help us, to make sure we all get the message of God. That's been our second goal through the story experience, to set up the whole church, the whole family, to go through the experience so we can help each other understand it. You know, that's what makes small groups so great. We are told next that the people began to weep, not just little tears, but all out weeping. Why? Because they were hearing God's word, His love, His desire to be with them, His promise, His plan to get them back, and they were no doubt overwhelmed with regret and joy at the same time. Nehemiah, the governor, had to step in and comfort them. He told them that this was a holy day. He called them to go back home and to celebrate, to share a meal together. Why? The story simply says, because they now understood the words that had been made known to them. The same emotion comes upon people today as they finally get what the Bible is all about. The Bible is not 100 ancient, unrelated paintings, but a mural all knitted together to tell of God's great love for us and the extent He will go to get us back. It is overwhelming when your soul finally gets this message, often resulting in tears of joy. But it doesn't stop there. As they were reading the law, they found things that they weren't doing. They didn't, as James tells us in the New Testament, want to be mere hearers of the word. They wanted to be doers of the word. So they found in the law that they were supposed to be observing this holiday called the Feast of Tabernacles, and they got after it. So much so, we are told, from the days of Joshua until that day, the Israelites had not celebrated it like this, and their joy was very great. You know, obeying God's word, aligning our lives to His plan, brings joy to our life like nothing else. The same is true for us. You may have missed it. I certainly did when I first read it. But the only thing they didn't reinstate is a king. This was never God's perfect idea, but He allowed it. And while there were a few good kings, for the most part, they led the people astray. The people are now not asking for a king. Been there, done that. The last person to speak before the Old Testament comes to a close is Malachi. He tells us that the next prophet who's going to speak for God is going to actually introduce us to the one we have been waiting for, the one who will provide the once and for all solution to getting us back to God. He's going to introduce you to the Messiah, and this is how he says it. I will send my messenger who will prepare the way before me. Then suddenly the Lord you are seeking will come to His temple. The messenger of the covenant, whom you desire, will come, says the Lord Almighty. Who is this messenger that he's talking about? Anybody got a clue? When we turn to the first pages of the New Testament, we know he's talking about John the Baptist. Matthew tells us in chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. In those days, John the Baptist came, preaching in the wilderness of Judea and saying, repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near. This is he who was spoken of through the prophet Isaiah, a voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make straight paths for Him. Isaiah also foretold of the role of John the Baptist in Isaiah 40 and verse 3, and now Malachi, right before the close of the Old Testament, restates it. Malachi says that the next time God speaks, which will be 400 years from now, it'll be through the lips of John the Baptist. He is going to prepare the way for Christ to come. What does it mean to prepare the way for the Lord? It isn't just an announcement. It is a call to prepare our hearts to recognize Him for who He is and to receive Him. I hope you've enjoyed our journey through the Old Testament. It is filled with stories of adventure, of love, of heartbreak, of triumph, of power, of disappointment, of struggle, and the list goes on. But remember, it isn't a bunch of unrelated stories. Each story we have encountered has contributed to the unfolding of the one story of God. In chapter 1 of the story, God revealed his vision to create the lower story and then to come down and to do life with us in a beautiful garden. But the first people didn't embrace that vision, and they were escorted from the garden. We learned that their choice is transmitted to all of us. We are carriers of the sin virus that keeps us separated from God. We also learned through the story of Noah that the solution to getting us back into a relationship with God is not going to be found in us. It must come from another. The rest of the story of the Bible is all about God's promise and plan to provide a way for us to come back to God, for each of us to have an opportunity to overturn Adam's choice and to make our own. Every single story we have read about Israel, from chapter 2 to chapter 21, has been pointing to the first coming of Christ, the Messiah. I've tried to show you how it all comes together to lead us to him. I've tried to show you the clues that God has left along the way. Now, as we turn the page, it's finally time for us to meet this one we've been waiting for, our Savior. Like the children of Israel, we need to prepare for the way of the Lord. We need to prepare our hearts to receive this one who is going to give us back our intended life and destiny with God. Are you ready to meet him? Then do what the Israelites did in this story. Stand to your feet, lift your hands to the heavens, and shout, "Amen, amen. So be it, so be it."
Amen. Amen. So be it. So be it. Well, that was Randy Frazee wrapping up the Old Testament and highlighting some things for us to consider in this chapter, in chapter 21. As I said earlier, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the in-between time where there was no prophecy on the earth, no recorded prophecy, and they call that the silent years. In the video I'm about to show you, it is about 40 minutes long, so get comfortable. Don't get too comfortable and fall asleep. But it is about 40 minutes long, and it is entitled From Malachi to Matthew, the historical background of the New Testament. Now, the author of this video is a doctor. He's very knowledgeable, and I'm familiar with him. And so, but he does once in a while, when he gets excited, just like a lot of teachers, especially Bible teachers, when he gets excited, he starts talking a little fast. And so you may have to turn up your device a little and turn up the speed on your ears to listen to him. The second thing I'll let you know about this video is that it's a lot of information. Like I said, this video is about 40 minutes long. Don't think that you have to understand everything, or if you're a note taker, that you have to get every detail. In the follow-up emails that I send out, I always try to send you a link to our online Bible study group webpage. And there's a resources section on there with videos, notes, and all kinds of great things. And you can go to the video and you can see it as many times as you want. So don't think you have to get it all, but just get the big picture of what's going on. There's probably about 2 or 3 things going on in those silent years that is very important historically, that sets us up for understanding better the New Testament. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll bear with me one more time here.
Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to look at the period of time from Malachi to Matthew as we continue our introduction to our survey of the Old Testament. We start with the Persian Empire. Remember that the Persians were the empire that was in control as our Old Testament comes to an end, and within 100 years the Persian Empire itself would come crashing down. The Persian Empire was the largest empire that the world had seen up to this point, stretching from the borders of Greece in the west and taking in Egypt all the way to the Hindu Kush and to the borders of India. It was Alexander the Great, this young king who came to the throne in his early 20s, who would, within the space of 10 years, bring the Persian Empire to an end. There's a mosaic that was found in the ruins of Pompeii. Today it's in the Naples Museum, and it pictures the epic battle of Alexander against King Darius of Persia. It was 3 such battles that cumulative, he won each one of those, and at the end of that time, the Persian Empire had come to an end. Josephus tells one story about Alexander as he was marching down the Levant. Each city to which he would come would open their doors. He would come in. He'd say, "Recognize me as king, and you can go about your business." And nearly every city did that. Tyre was a notable exception. And he was besieging Gaza and sent some troops up to Jerusalem. And the doors were shut in their face. They were not allowed to enter the city, and of course that meant that from Alexander's point of view, he was going to destroy the city. And so Josephus tells the story about how Alexander sent some troops to besiege and capture Jerusalem and slaughter the inhabitants. And the high priest of the city went out with a number of the other priests to meet him as he came up to Jerusalem. And Josephus said they had with them a copy of the book of Daniel. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, that was showed to Alexander, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that he himself was the person intended, and he was then glad. And so Alexander was so impressed by this that the Hebrew scriptures talked about a Greek king who would conquer Persia, that he said, well, you guys can go ahead about your business. And he gave he treated the Jews well and gave them a certain amount of autonomy. Of course, they had to pay taxes to him, but that was par for the course. Alexander continues on into Egypt. In Egypt, he is crowned as the pharaoh. Even takes a trip out to the Siwa oasis, way out on the borders of Libya. It was no small affair. So here's Alexander. He's moved through Turkey, moved down through the Levant to Egypt. I mentioned he went all the way to the Siwa oasis. Egypt becomes his without any really too much in the way of fighting. Then he turns back and marches across Mesopotamia and into Persia, captures the city of Persepolis, the Persian capital, burns it to the ground. He's fought Darius now several times, and the Persian Empire is now his. But he continues on to the east, to the Hindu Kush, and all the way into India over the next several years, and only turns back when his men say, please, we don't want to go any further, and they basically revolt against him. They stage a sit-down strike, and he says, come on, let's go, and they won't, and finally he agrees to turn back, and he comes back to Babylon. Now, the world of Alexander, he had brought about a cultural interchange from east to west. If you wanted to talk to Alexander, you basically had to learn his language. And so Greek now is going to become the common language of the entire civilized world. What's more, he brings a great deal of scientific interchange as he goes upon his march of conquest. He has with him scientists and observers, and remember his tutor when he was growing up had been Aristotle, and so he was well versed in science and interested in these sorts of things. Hellenization, and by this I mean, now the word Hellenization just means, we could call it Greekization, because Hellas is just the Greek word for Greece. They don't call their country Greece. We call it that. So Hellenization, that is the Greek influence, not just of the language, but of the culture now began to be felt throughout the ancient world as a result of Alexander's conquest. As we said, the Greek language also becomes the common language. As a result, our New Testament, all of the earliest copies of our New Testament are not written in Aramaic or Hebrew. They are written in Greek. Alexander finally died. He was about 33 years old, and as he lay on his deathbed, his soldiers gathered around and asked, "To whom do you give your kingdom?" And he whispered out, "To the strongest." Leaving no male heir, this meant that there would be a power grab to see who could take what from his kingdom. There were a number of generals that each grabbed a portion. Ptolemy grabbed Egypt, Perdiccas grabbed Mesopotamia, Antigonus the One-Eyed, what we call Anatolia or modern-day Turkey, Lysimachus took Thrace, Cassander took Macedonia. But this didn't. This wasn't going to pan out as the sort of a long-term solution. Perdiccas, he comes up against Ptolemy, tries to take Egypt, and he is destroyed. And then the other kings all team up against Antigonus the One-Eyed. They march against Antigonus, they defeat him, and now this doesn't happen overnight, this is over the space of 20 or 30 years. And when the dust settles, the new ruler of Anatolia and Mesopotamia will be Seleucus. And he and his descendants, now Seleucus is one of Ptolemy's subgenerals initially, but instead of giving the property back to Ptolemy, Seleucus sets himself up and his descendants as the new ruler. So you have Greek rulers now in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, and in, of course, Thrace and Greece. You would expect to see Greek rulers there. But these are all Greek rulers. In fact, Ptolemy, and they'll be the first, the second, the third, all the way down to the 12th. Every one of the Ptolemies will be Egyptian. The last of the Ptolemies that we shall see will be a young gal by the name of Cleopatra, but she will be Greek. And with the exception of Cleopatra, none of the Ptolemies ever even learned to speak Egyptian. They're all speaking Greek. Likewise, the Seleucids, now they won't all be named Seleucus. Sometimes we'll see another name, but it will be his descendants that will be ruling for the next 100, 150, 200 years or so. Ptolemy, the second of the Ptolemies, Ptolemy Philadelphus, is interesting to us because first of all, he builds the Pharos lighthouse, a lighthouse near Alexandria, which became one of the wonders of the world. It's said that you could see its light from 50 miles away. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but that's how the story is told. He also builds a library at Alexandria. I've been in the modern-day library of Alexandria and never been in the ancient one. It's long since been destroyed, and it too was one of the wonders of the world. And Ptolemy Philadelphus set out to have copies of every book in the world in his library, and one of the books that he wanted for his library was the Hebrew Scriptures. However, he couldn't read Hebrew, he couldn't even read Egyptian, and he was ruling over Egypt, and so an order went out for the Hebrew Scriptures to be translated into Greek. And that translation took place now. It's known as the Septuagint. The Septuagint means, the septus means 70, and the story goes that there were 70 translators who worked on this project, but what they did is they translated the entire Old Testament Hebrew Scriptures into Greek, and we still have copies of the Greek translation. Like I said, it's known as the Septuagint. It wasn't long before the Ptolemies and the Seleucids were at war one with another, and this was going to be the pattern for the next 100 years or so. So we have Seleucus in the north, the Ptolemies in the south, and their descendants in each case, with little tiny Israel sitting in the middle, and first Israel would be a property of the Ptolemies, and then the Seleucids would come down, and for a time Israel would be the property of the Seleucids. So you're going to have Israel feeling a little bit like a ping pong ball between these two rivals. Finally, Antiochus III, he's one of the Seleucid kings. He's also known as Antiochus the Great, because I guess it doesn't get much better than him. He marches all the way to India, just like Alexander had, stocks up on his store of war elephants, among other things, and he takes Judah from Ptolemy. As I said, it had been bouncing back and forth. But he loses in a battle to Ptolemy at the Battle of Raphia, so he is still unable to do that final conquest over Egypt. And he is host to Hannibal. Remember, Hannibal was the great enemy, not of the Ptolemies, but of Rome, which tells me that Rome is now entering the picture. And after Hannibal had lost to the Romans, Hannibal came to the east and found refuge with Antiochus III, which is not going to put him on the same side as the Romans. So Antiochus III and the Romans, they enter into battle, and Antiochus III loses to the Romans, and as a part of the loss, his son is taken as a captive back to Rome. He'll be a hostage. Now, that doesn't mean he's put into prison. He goes to school there and probably has a roommate and things like that. But his son is in Rome. Now, after Antiochus III dies, his son, Antiochus IV, he's also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, that means Antiochus the Magnificent, although the Jews had a different nickname for him. They called him Antiochus Epimanes, which meant Antiochus the Madman. And that's going to tell you his relationship with the Jewish people. Well, as we had the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and Antiochus IV, when his father dies, he escapes from Rome, and he comes back to take up the throne of the Seleucids. He's been a hostage there in Rome, but now he makes his escape, and he comes back, takes up the crown, and he decides he's going to be another Alexander. He comes down to Judah. He doesn't really care for the things that are going on in there. He says, I want a more Greek-friendly governor, and they don't really have governors so much in Judah as much as they would have a high priest. So he deposes the high priest, and he puts a high priest who will be a little bit more Greek in his thinking, which does not endear him at all to the Jews. Next, he invades Egypt. He decides, I want to be another Alexander the Great, and so I'll do what Dad could not do. I will come down against Ptolemy, and this time he comes down and he wins big. And he has Ptolemy bottled up in the last city. It's about to fall, when all of a sudden, coming out from the city is a Roman magistrate, all by himself. And Antiochus says, well, what's this? It's actually an acquaintance of his that he had met back in Rome. And this magistrate walks up to him and says, the Senate and the people of Rome want you out of Egypt. Go home. And Antiochus has actually been to Rome. He has a high regard for Rome and for the power of Rome. And so he's a bit intimidated. But he says, well, I'll tell you what, I'll think about it. And the magistrate says, you can think about all you want. Draws a circle around him on the sand and says, give me your answer before you step out of that circle. Now, Antiochus is thoroughly humiliated, but he knows better than to go up against Rome. And so he agrees to leave. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, word has gotten back that Antiochus had died in Egypt. Now, it wasn't true. It was just a false rumor. You know how you have false rumors on the internet today. They had them back then as well. And Antiochus arrives in Jerusalem, and he's very much alive. And he's angry at the Jewish celebration over his death. And he comes in and he imposes the following regulations. The Jews are no longer allowed to assemble for prayer. Observance of the Sabbath is now forbidden. Possession of the scriptures are illegal. It's illegal to even own a copy of the scriptures. Circumcision of male children is now illegal. Circumcision is illegal. And the observance to dietary laws is now illegal. In fact, Antiochus goes into the temple and has a pig killed upon the altar and orders everybody sacrifice and eat up. He has a statue of Zeus placed into the temple. In fact, and nobody knows what Zeus looks like, so those that made the statue make him look like Antiochus. It actually looks like a statue of Antiochus standing in the temple. Everybody's supposed to worship that now. These pagan sacrifices are now mandated. And this continues for a number of months until finally his officials are in a little town called Modin, and they are seeking to impose these restrictions, these pagan sacrifices. And a elderly priest, Matthias, and his sons are in that town, and they institute a revolt. We're going to call it the Maccabean Revolt, named after one of those sons. He's not the oldest, but he's sort of the leader of the group. His name is Judas, but he gets the nickname Maccabeus because the word Maccabeus means hammer, and he really puts the hammer to the Seleucids. So the Maccabean Revolt breaks out, and finally by 166 BC they are able to retake Jerusalem and they recapture the temple. The temple is finally liberated. It is cleansed. All the pigs are taken away, and there's a cleansing of the temple as the people return to the Lord. That celebration continues to be observed even today. We call it the Festival of Lights, or the Feast of Hanukkah. Now, Judas was the initial leader, but after he eventually dies in battle. And so it will be one of his brothers, Simon, who becomes the new leader. They're not calling themselves kings. These are a family of priests. But eventually they are going to take the role of high priest. And Judah is recognized as a free state in the year 142 BC. It's Rome that recognizes Judah at first. But eventually everybody else does. And so Judah has gained her independence. As we said, this family, Simon in particular, eventually takes the role of high priest. He's sort of the ruler. They don't really have kings yet, although eventually they're going to take the title of king as well. Simon reigns until he is murdered by his son-in-law. And we already read that. He's murdered by his son-in-law. And now we're going to see the emergence of two new Jewish parties. First of all, they are the Hasidim, the pious ones. They are reflected in those who said we wouldn't turn and worship those false gods. We wouldn't eat those things that were wrong. In fact, we don't care for the way that there's a certain Greek thinking that's beginning to seep into our culture. We're going to remain free of that. And this group will eventually become known as the Pharisees of New Testament era. So we have the Hasidim on the one side. You have what we could only call the Hellenists. Now these aren't Greeks, but they're Greek thinkers. They're Greek thinking Jews who have been influenced by that Greek thinking. And these seem to be characterized by the Sadducees of a later age. The Sadducees, now they would have been shocked to hear themselves described as coming under Greek influence. I'm not sure if they thought of themselves that way. But we see them adopting both Greek ideas and Greek philosophies and Greek ways of looking even at their own scriptures. We have Simon, who passes the leadership, can't call it a throne yet, down to John Hyrcanus. By this time you are beginning to call them kings. He has two sons, and Aristobulus, he becomes the high priest and king, but he imprisons his brother, actually all of his brothers and his mother, thinking that they might try to usurp his authority. And so you can see the families aren't getting along very well, even though this is a priestly family. Finally, we get to the point where the two brothers are each fighting over the throne, and meanwhile, there's a Roman general in the neighborhood. Pompey the Great had been commissioned by the Romans to clear the seas of piracy. He had done that within the space of 3 months and still had plenty of time on his rolls to do something further. And so he came to Syria, and he had been conquering there. And these two brothers, these two Maccabean, I'm going to call them by their family name, the Hasmonean brothers, both sent word to Pompey saying, will you please come and get rid of this brother of mine? And he says, oh, okay. And he comes down and he takes Jerusalem in the year 63 BC. From now on, Jerusalem and Judah will know, in fact, he actually changes the name. Instead of being called Judah, it will now be called Judea, and it will become a Roman province. So I have Judea, that part that used to be Judah. To the north there will be a separate province known as Samaria, because there's a different people group. These are folk that have intermarried with some of the resident Jewish people living there to be sort of I guess we could only call them sort of a half-breed. And then there are 10 cities to the east of the Jordan River, And the way you say that in Greek, Apollos is a city, and Deca is Latin or Greek for the idea of 10. So the Decapolis refers to the area of those 10 cities, 10 Greek cities. Now, eventually we get to the point where Pompey and who was originally his partner, Julius Caesar, they have a falling out, and they're going to plunge the Roman Empire into civil war. The Battle of Farsellus is where this is settled in Greece, both Caesar and Pompey. And it is Pompey, remember, he's the one who had come and taken Jerusalem, and he had set up some certain arrangements, but he is defeated. He runs down to Egypt, where he's put to death, and now Julius Caesar becomes virtually the ruler of the world. That's only going to last a handful of years, and then Caesar himself will be assassinated. Meanwhile, what's happened in Judea? We have a Idumean by the name of Antipater, who had been appointed first by Pompey, but now Pompey is defeated, and this is affirmed by Julius Caesar, Antipater, who's going to be the procurator. A procurator is one whose job is to procure the taxes, so we could call him a glorified tax collector, over both Judah and Samaria and the Decapolis. And Antipater takes two of his sons and places them in positions of authority. First, Faisal, his older son, is placed in authority over Judea, and then his younger son, by the name of Herod, is placed in authority over Galilee to the north. That lasts until about 40 BC. Now, by this time, Julius Caesar has been killed, and other things are going to take place that we'll talk about in just a moment. But the Jews revolt, and they seem to get, according to some reports, they get some help from the east. A group known as the Parthians come and help in rousting not only Antipater. Actually, Antipater's already died. Faisal is captured and killed, and Herod actually has to battle his way out. Comes down to Jerusalem, and just south of Jerusalem, about 5 miles or so, right near Bethlehem. He fights a retreating battle. He manages to escape. He gets down to Petra, and from there makes his way to Egypt, and then finally to Rome. And in Rome, he finds two patrons. One is Octavius, the adopted son, actually nephew of Julius Caesar, but in his will he had been adopted. So Octavius, and also one of Julius Caesar's old generals, Marcus Antonio. We know him as Mark Antony. And it's Mark Antony in particular that takes Herod under his wing. And these two bring Herod before the Senate of Rome, and the Senate of Rome pronounces Herod to be the new king of the Jews. However, he's a king without a kingdom. He's just been driven off by the Jews, and of course the Parthians too. So he is sent back to Israel to recapture the country of Israel for Rome and for himself, because he's going to be their new king. He will be their client king as he recaptures Israel. We'll get to Cleopatra in a bit. She and Herod had a meeting. Cleopatra always wanted to have Judah and Israel for her own possession, and at one point Mark Antony actually sounds like he's going to give it to her and make some promises to her. She really never does get her hands on it. Now, Herod the Great, as we said, 40 BC, he is pronounced king of the Jews. However, it's going to take him 3 years to get the kingdom back, so it's not until 37 BC that he actually starts to reign back in Israel, now that he's captured the kingdom back for Rome. Among other things of Herod's projects, he's going to start a number of different building projects. One of those will be the temple. Now we have a picture here of Zerubbabel's temple, how it had been rebuilt after coming back into the land in the days of the Persians. It had seen some modifications in the days of the Seleucids, again some modifications in the days of the Hasmonean expansion, but Herod now takes that and he's going to vastly expand. He will vastly expand the temple into the this, both to the north, there's going to be a fortress that he will build. In fact, he'll name it after his client, Marcus Antonius. It's going to be called the Antonia Fortress. He will build the royal stoa in the south, here on the right-hand side of our screen, that will be known as Solomon's Porch. In fact, the Solomon's Porch area will extend completely around this area. It'll have a series of gates and bridges leading up to the Temple Mount. So he greatly expands upon that. As we said, the Antonia Fortress actually comes into play in the book of Acts later on when the Apostle Paul is arrested in the temple and brought up to the Antonia Fortress to have a hearing before the Roman centurion. There's a model that you can see of what it would have looked like in that day. So the temple was a huge affair. Notice that it had all of these surrounding walls. Now the temple itself is just that big structure right smack in the middle, but around it there were courts of the priests and of the men and courts of the women. And then there was a low boundary wall, a dividing wall that separated that from the outer areas where only where Gentiles were allowed to come. Gentiles were not allowed into the temple proper or even into any of the inner courts, but they could come to what was called the court of the Gentile around these outer courts. Herod also built the Herodium. I mentioned a battle that he fought near Bethlehem, just outside of Bethlehem. In fact, you can see it from Bethlehem. This sort of conical mountain. It looks like a volcano, but actually this is all man-made. It was a fortress back in its day. It had some huge towers, and what you're looking at in the foreground are these pillars that surround a swimming pool that Herod had constructed. So it must have been quite lavish in his day. Here's a artist's conception of how the Herodium would have looked in its heyday, where you can see one of the towers and then a cross-section of one of the others. So, aerial view. Now, I didn't take this picture. I've never been up in a plane over this area, but borrowed an aerial view of the Herodium looking down into it. And again, another aerial view of the big swimming pool in the Herodium. There's a number of underground tunnels. In fact, this is very common from a great many cities in the regions of Israel. The tunnels oftentimes lead to the water sources, but also they can be used as a way of escape, and treasures, different things can be found there. Quite fascinating to go not just into the area of Israel, but under the areas of Israel. Another of Herod's fortresses was the great fortress at Masada. Now this is by the shores of the Dead Sea. And Masada itself is just a natural fortress where the wall, the mountain just goes straight up, and then there's this big level area on the top. And yet Herod takes this and he builds a great palace. Here's from the other side of Masada where you can see the different fortifications and palace structures. Still another view of Masada. Israel did not possess any natural harbors, and so Herod had one constructed. He named it after Julius Caesar, one of his patrons, and so it was called Caesarea. There's a couple of Caesareas mentioned in the Bible. There's another Caesarea called Caesarea Philippi. That's not this place. This is Caesarea Maritimia, that is Caesarea by the ocean. And this big breakwater allowed ships to come in and be sheltered from the storms. But it was more than just a breakwater. It was a vast city. This became the seat of the government. So, big breakwater on the city. To do that, he sunk great stones. Scholars are still trying to figure out exactly how he managed such a engineering feat. There is today at the ruins of Caesarea the theater of Herod that he built there. It is still used today. They have regularly outdoor concerts that meet there, and wonderful acoustics that allow one to stand in the middle of that theater and speak, and everybody around is able to hear. There were no natural water sources, no spring waters at Caesarea, and so water had to be piped in, and it came via 3 aqueducts bringing water from as many as 9, 10, 12 miles away. Now, it wasn't long before Herod began to have some domestic troubles. In particular, he had a number of wives, always one at a time, but one of the things he did to try to legitimize himself is he married Mariamne, the last of the Hasmonean rulers, the last of the Maccabean rulers, and had 2 sons by her. It has been said that Herod, one of his greatest mistakes was not just to marry Mariamne, but to fall in love with her. It wasn't long before he began to find plots against his throne, usually aimed at removing him and putting one of those 2 sons upon the throne. And so eventually he murdered both of his sons by Mariamne, murdered Mariamne as well. He had killed so many of his own sons that Octavius Augustus quipped, the Roman emperor quipped, "It's better to be Herod's hus than to be Herod's huios." Now it's a little, it works in Greek, not as much as in English, but what we're saying there, it's better to be Herod's pig than to be Herod's son, because Herod would observe the dietary laws, but he gobbled up his own sons. After the death of Herod, his son Archelaus, one of his surviving sons, I have to say, is on the throne for just a brief time until a petition from the Jews at Rome is so evident, and he's mismanaged things so bad that he's removed from the throne by the Romans. And from now on, Israel, at least for a number of years, will be ruled by a series of either procurators or prefects, that is, Roman governors, Roman officials. Meanwhile, another of Herod's surviving sons, Herod Antipas, is granted a tetrarchy. That is, a tetrarchy means ruler of a 4th part, and he will be over Galilee, that is the area around the Sea of Galilee, and Perea, that's the area just to the east of the Jordan River, down around the Dead Sea. He's made a tetrarch, a ruler of a 4th part, and we're told not only in Josephus, but we even read about this in the New Testament, that he has an affair with one of his nieces by the name of Herodias. Now, to get the family line, we have to go back and look at Herod the Great. As I said, Herod the Great had a number of wives. Can't put them all here, they won't fit. But we mentioned how he had married Mariamne and had the 2 sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, both of who were put to death by Herod, but they had children who survived. And so we mentioned Archelaus already, who rules for a short time before he's removed. And Antipas, Herod Antipas, they all like to call themselves Herod because he was the great. So Antipas becomes the tetrarch, and he takes up with his niece, Herodias, even though she's married to another of the sons of Herod. She is married to Philip, another son she's married to her half-brother, Philip, but she leaves her husband and she goes and takes up with Antipas, even though she's been married. In fact, she even has a daughter. And it's that affair against which John the Baptist preaches and says, it's just not right for you to have your brother's wife. And as a result, John the Baptist is arrested. And remember, he is even executed at the urging of Herodias after her daughter. Now, her daughter's not mentioned in the Bible, but her name is given in Josephus, Salome. After Salome, dances for Antipas, and Antipas says, "Well, what do you want?" And Salome, this daughter of Herodias, says, "Well, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter." Just to continue our New Testament look, we're going to see Agrippa the First. He will be mentioned in Acts, and we see his death in Acts chapter 12. And during his time, this is a generation later, he will actually be, for a short time, king of the Jews again, where there won't be any procurators, but then he dies. His death is described in Acts chapter 12 after he had put James to death. And then after that, Israel will again be under the various procurators. So we have Antipas and Herodias. Also, we just mentioned John the Baptist. He is put to death during this period, and that's actually described in several of the Gospels. Antipater later on is going to be accused of doing some things politically incorrect. He will find himself back in Rome, and he will be questioned as to some of his actions, and in particular he has been storing up weaponry, and that sounds like he's going to revolt against Rome. I'm not sure if he was really planning on that, but he will be banished, and Herodias will go along with him in his banishment, and he will be banished to Gaul, where he disappears from the pages of history. Now, I want to talk in our closing moments about the Pharisees versus the Sadducees, because these are the two groups with whom Jesus deals quite extensively. The Pharisees, the term describes the separated ones. Remember, we described those as the Hasidim, who really didn't want anything to do with the Greek culture. They had separated themselves from that sort of those sorts of ideas. Over against the Sadducees, who, now the term means the righteous ones. I'm not sure how righteous they were, but that's at least what the name meant. The Pharisees held to the authority of the entire Old Testament as well as to the oral law, in contrast to the Sadducees, who viewed only the Torah as having great authority. They said, well, the rest of the Old Testament, those are nice books, but they don't really have that much in the way of authority over us. So they rejected some of the teachings of those other books. For example, the resurrection that's taught in Daniel chapter 12. The Sadducees had no use for that sort of teaching. The Pharisees believed in miracles, angels, immortality, these things that are mentioned all throughout the Old Testament. The Sadducees rejected miracles, angels, immortality. When you're dead, you're dead. That's very Greek in their thinking. The Pharisees believed in a future resurrection. The Sadducees denied any life after death. The Pharisees were very popular in the synagogues. That didn't mean everybody was a Pharisee. Far from it. The Pharisees were actually a fairly small group, but they had a good deal of popularity. By contrast, the Sadducees tended to rule in the temple. They were on the Supreme Court, and they had all of the big roles within the temple. Now, most Jewish people would not fit into either one of these camps. We could describe the Pharisees as the ones that were very stringent. The Sadducees, were more of a I don't want to call them a social club because that's not really fair to them. They pictured themselves as, we're the old guard, we hold to just the Torah. But in reality, most people might have been influenced by one group or the other, but the greater majority were somewhere in the middle. There were some other sects we ought to mention. We've already described the Pharisees as the separatists, the Sadducees as the liberal party. There was also the Essenes. Now, this was a very small group who they didn't think the Pharisees went far enough in their separation, so they had physically separated themselves from the rest of the Jews, and they became communal separatists. They actually go down by the shores of the Dead Sea, and they set up camp in places like Qumran, where they had their own communities. And then finally we had to mention the Zealots, again a small group, but these were the nationalists, who they said, the only way to really do good is just to get rid of Rome. We need a independent Israel, down with Rome, down with all these procurators and anybody that's friendly to Rome. And it's interesting that one of the disciples of Jesus is actually known as Simon the Zealot. So Jesus draws his disciples from a variety of religious backgrounds.
All right. Well, our history buffs are going crazy right now because they have gotten more history in one evening than they can probably stand. The rest of us might be a little overwhelmed, but again, you don't have to learn all that information. You're going to see some of those names again. And just to tie in some of what he was saying, if you take a look at your screen, I'm sharing here a PowerPoint, and I want to let me switch settings here. There we go. And I want to just tie together a couple of things before we leave. When we take a look at Israel, just remember that Israel is in the middle. even to this day, because of geography, they're between Egypt and they're between Syria. And there's a little tiny strip of land called Israel in the middle, and they've always been that way. As a result, during the silent period, this testamental period, or between Malachi and Matthew, there's a lot of governments that come and go, and they're occupied many times. You heard about the Persians. That's where we left off after they were in exile. The Babylonians took them into exile, and then the Persians let them go back to Israel. And then here comes the Greeks. And Alexander the Greek and his descendants and those from Macedonia and the Greek areas, they take over. So once again, Israel, or specifically Judea or Judah, is taking over. Because of the Maccabean Revolt, for a short time, the Jews actually are dependent. I believe it was about 142 BC. Because of the Maccabean Revolt, they throw off the shackles of the Greeks, and they actually get to rule themselves for a little while. Unfortunately, the Jews squabbled amongst each other, and Jewish puppets were put in place by Rome. And Rome basically ends up, by the time of Jesus, taking over the country of Israel and being ruled by Israel. So you can see countries going, or rulers going, and governments coming and going. And just remember that phrase, Israel in the middle. Now, just to put a point on what the narrator of the video said, there are some Jewish groups, or also called sects, that you'll need to know about. Two of which are very important. Of course, the Pharisees, they react to occupation by separating themselves, not necessarily physically, but culturally and their attitude. They don't want to have anything to do with Hellenization or the Greek culture. They are deep into the word, and they are still into the Jewish religion. And so they basically have separated themselves from Greek culture and from the Romans. Whereas the Sadducees, I would call them more collaborators. Some scholars would call them a more liberal sect. They were a little more loose in their doctrine and so forth. I would call them probably closer to collaborators with the Greek and Hellenization culture and with the Romans. They were kind of like go along to get along. They were in charge of the temple, and they kept control of the temple. But as you heard in the video, the Pharisees a lot of times ruled the synagogues, which were scattered about throughout Judea and even outside of Judea. A couple other minor groups that was mentioned in the video: the Essenes. They were around the Dead Sea area, and they were communal separatists. In other words, they were physically separate. They were saying to everyone, we not only don't want to have anything to do with the Greek culture and Rome or anything, we want to be by ourselves, and we are going to completely split off from even our fellow Jews around Jerusalem and Judea. And they went down to the Dead Sea. And by the way, most scholars believe that this is the community around the Dead Sea that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were found in 1947, and they had biblical writings and so forth, and they were very, very important in biblical literature. The last, you heard the narrator say that the Zealots, they were more like rebels. You could call them nationalists. But they protested a lot, and they reacted to Rome not only in protest, but there was a small sect within the Zealots that had made a vow that as long as the Roman government occupied, they would not eat or they would not sleep. And so they were very, very instrumental in causing Rome to crack down on Judea. And so and then they had assassin groups and assassins that killed Roman officials and so forth. So here you can see, what's interesting is you can see 4 distinct reactions to occupation. And remember, these are all Jews. And so you see that you could be a separatist, you could have your own culture within the occupying culture, you could be a collaborator, you could physically separate yourself from the occupiers, or you could rebel even to the point of violence. So I thought that was interesting that we see a variety of different reactions to the occupying force. Lastly, the comment about languages. Before this intertestamental period, Hebrew was the language. They read in Hebrew, they talked to each other in Hebrew, most of the Jews. However, during this intertestamental period, you see Greek and Aramaic, which is a sister language of Hebrew. You see Greek and Aramaic being used predominantly. Greek was pretty much the business language. If you did business in that area of the world, certainly within in the Roman Empire, if you wanted to conduct any business, which could mean going to the market to buy food, or you have a small business, or you work for someone and they want to talk to you, you had to learn Greek. So Greek was pretty much widespread, and everybody talked Greek or learned Greek. Aramaic was popular among the Jews. In fact, most scholars believe that Jesus actually taught, and what we read in the New Testament, Jesus's teachings, he spoke Aramaic in his speeches and his teachings and so forth, and not in Greek. So imagine reading the teachings of Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. Don't imagine English, don't even imagine Greek. He was probably speaking Aramaic, and then it was recorded in Greek in the New Testament. So wanted you all to see and get a lot of information under your belt before we go into the New Testament. I apologize for being over a couple of minutes. If you do have any questions or comments, we'll be hanging out as usual after this session, and you can ask you can make some comments or ask some questions, and feel free to hang out. I'm going to say goodbye to our recording audience, and then we'll pray and dismiss. But for those watching this recording, thank you for hanging in there. More video than we normally have, and feel free to watch this recording as many times as you want. And I'll see you next time. Thank you.